If you look at cows, in a big pasture, and I think about those big pastures out in Colorado when you come into a valley,
Yeah.
And a storm blows in, cows, what they do is they go with the storm. So they're over the storm forever. Buffalo are just different. What they do, they turn into the storm.
Okay.
Okay. And they get through the storm quicker. And so in life, we're all going to face storms. I'd rather be a buffalo and turn into the storm and face my troubles instead of walk away from the storm and let the storm just kind of follow me. How many times have we done that in our lives?
Yep. Chico, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I can't wait to have you. Today will be awesome. I wanted to start with something that I think it was on your website, or maybe I heard you say it, but you said, be a buffalo, not a cow. What does that mean?
Hey, I love that. If you look at cows, in a big pasture, and I think about those big pastures out in Colorado when you come into a valley, and a storm blows in, cows, what they do is they go with the storm. So they're over the storm forever. Buffalo are just different. What they do, they turn into the storm.
Okay.
Okay. And they get through the storm quicker. And so in life, we're all going to face storms. I'd rather be a buffalo and turn into the storm and face my troubles instead of walk away from the storm and let the storm just kind of follow me. How many times have we done that in our lives?
Yep. And we're always in a storm, or there's always a storm coming.
Yeah, it's brewing or something.
Yep.
And so it's like, hey, I want to turn and face, okay, what am I facing?
I love it. All right, let's set the stage. You have a really unique history, and what you do today is super unique. We got to meet each other last year at the retreat, which was amazing. But I want to start pre-sobriety. So what was your life like kind of leading in? Because I think becoming sober, as people will figure out here, is a huge transition in your life and catalyst for what you've done the last 30 something years. But what did life look like before that?
Well, I grew up in San Antonio, so I say like I'm a real Texan. I live in Dallas now. I mean, Fort Worth's more real Texas than Dallas is. So I grew up in San Antonio, oldest of four boys, really three at the time. My dad was oldest of six. He died tragically in an accident in 1979. I was 10, almost 11 years old. That time here in Texas, drinking age was 18. I grew up, my dad grew up on a working cattle ranch. The west side of the family was this big ranching cattle business. And so there was a lot of drinking, a lot of that, those old messages, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. Men don't cry, all those kind of things. It's like, I had tragedy even prior to my dad passing away. My aunt died 2 years before. And so there was these messages that, kept coming in. My dad, he was a 29-year-old dad of three boys, and, his wife's sister dies, and he brings me into the study and says, Chico, as an 8-year-old, hey, you cry now, but when you leave this room, you're not going to cry again. You need to be strong for your mom and your brothers and your cousins.
Yep.
And so it's like those messages, were that way. It's like, hold my feelings in, stuff that stuff. And so growing up, was active, as a kid in sports. In school, I struggled big time in school. I struggled, had learning differences. At the time, you call it a disability, but today I just learn differently. Yeah. And so I don't learn like the majority of kids learn. And so I struggled growing up in school. I struggled, even I can joke, and maybe my friend will hear this, but we were at summer camp after 8th grade, and just how my brain worked, and I'm going to expose myself. We're writing letters home to our parents, and I look at my buddy Dayton, and I go, Dayton, how do you spell we? I couldn't even spell we after 8th grade. Is it W-E-E? My brain didn't register because my mind's always going a lot faster.
Yeah.
And so I struggled in school, but made it through it. Started drinking at an early age, and in middle school and in high school. went to a boarding school 1 year. Didn't even complete the year. It was a strong Christian prep school up in Long Island, New York, and so was exposed to a different culture. These other students, they always said, Chico, you talk so slow, because they were Long Islanders and talking fast and blah, 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 nonstop. And so I did that, but I came back and finished high school, went to college, and my drinking, always consequences after consequences after consequences. But I had a moment back in August, today's July 31st, August of 89. I finished my sophomore year in college at SMU. I was supposed to be at SMU. I was down in Austin, opening weekend of school, before school starts, I'm drinking. And that was my last drink. It was August 26th. My sobriety date's August 28th, 89. But that's where I was making it through school, but I wasn't really, I wasn't thriving.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that.
Did you wake up and you're like, I got to quit? Did you go to jail and in a jail's like,
yes.
Was there a moment?
There was a moment of clarity. I mean, you and I were talking before about how you were in the Greek system at TCU. I was in the Greek system at SMU. Back in the 80s, when I was a pledge, the actives even put me on alcohol probation. They saw a problem with my drinking and told me I couldn't drink. That didn't happen in the 80s.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's happening now, but it didn't happen in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so there was always these moments, but my moment of clarity was I was down in Austin at a fraternity party and drinking, and I got arrested at the fraternity house, and my buddies that were in that fraternity told the other guys that didn't grow up with me, leave him in jail. He needs to stay there. And so I got out a couple days later and was supposed to be back up in Dallas at SMU. And that was that moment of clarity. I go, I need help. I'm supposed to be living in the fraternity house. There's been all these signs from middle school, high school, the fraternity, guys not wanting to bail me out. That was the second time I got arrested for assaulting a police officer.
Yeah.
So I like to fight. And you know me, I'm not a big guy, but man, when I drank, I was big.
Okay. You said that you had to come to the decision that you needed to change. Speaking of like people broadly, is it possible to recover if you haven't told yourself from the very beginning, I have a problem and I need to change? Like, because you see people all the time that are in and out of rehab, or they're constantly quitting, but they're starting again.
Yeah. Well, alcoholism, drug addictions, it is a disease.
Right.
When I had that moment of clarity on August 28th, 89, and came back up to Dallas and withdrew from college, I didn't think I was going to be today, almost 35 years, still clean and sober.
Yeah.
That wasn't, I had a moment of clarity that I needed help.
Yeah.
But my help was, I knew I had assaulted a police officer for the second time.
Yeah.
I was fearful that they were going to find out, Texas, because this happened in North Carolina, my first assault on an officer. I thought they were going to find out, and I was facing some, real time.
Yeah.
It's a class A misdemeanor. So my intention on getting help was to get help to get through this court case.
Yep.
I did have, and a lot of people don't go into treatment. It's like, we're here in Texas and stuff like that kind of bootstrap mentality is like, I don't see anybody clicking their boot heels going, damn, I'm an alcoholic. I want to get sober today. No, there's always some kind of consequence.
Yeah.
But in that moment of surrender, when someone can find that moment of surrender, and mine happened at 90 days of sobriety. I was in treatment. I went to, back then, what was called a halfway house.
Yeah.
And I went to a halfway house in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
And I was at, I came home for Thanksgiving, and I was talking and went with my parents to church. I was rebelling against church, rebelling against God, all those things. And that moment on November 26, 89, this missionary named Sammy Tibbetts was just talking about Romania. And while he was talking about Romania and just sharing the gospel in Romania, he was talking about the Romanians and Ceausescu, and the wall had just come down, but it didn't come down in Romania. It came down in in Berlin. And he was talking about how Ceausescu was trying to build a 1 million-man army, and he wasn't bringing down his wall. And all there was these Romanians, all they wanted to do was believe. And there was these outside churches outside the cities. And he talked about witnessing Ceausescu's army come in and kill all the men that were outside. And then the women and children were in the church, and that he would burn them alive. And that's where God grabbed my heart and said, man, these people are dying just to worship. And and I still get chills today that's the day that, God grabbed my heart and just radically changed me. Now, I still had issues and I still had problems and I still had a lot of work to do. And I'm still a man in work in progress. I'm still active with a group of men, where we go and dig deep and do our own work. And then, I've gotten back into therapy myself to do work. But the cool thing, he grabbed a hold of me. And that was November 26, 89. April of 1993, I'm leading 10 kids from Frankfurt, Germany on the military base to Romania on a mission trip. That's God.
Yeah.
I still think about that when I'm just sharing that story with you. It's like, wow, he's had his hand. That's why I want to be a buffalo. I want to face, the trials, whatever I come into, the storms in my life.
Yep.
Yeah.
What does believing in Jesus mean to you? Because you just said, and I think it was the best way put is like, it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. It's not some commitment that you're never going to sin again and you're going to be perfect. It's a commitment that you are a sinner and that you wake up every day trying to get even just a little bit more Christ-like. But to you, like, how do you think about the journey?
I like that. I was this new book that I've been reading. It's kind of my favorite right now. And, everybody gives me a hard time because whatever's going on in my world, it might become my favorite.
Yeah.
But it's called Sacred Fire.
Yeah.
And he's quoting this guy that said, is faith, what is faith? Is it more about the heart or your feelings? And this guy kind of answered it in a crass way. No, it's either. It's neither one of those. It's really about where your ass is.
Yeah.
And so for faith in my relationship with Christ, if I'm of service to others, if I'm getting out of self, if I'm looking at what's going on with me and seeing what's getting in the way of me caring for my wife, loving the guy on the road as I drove over here from, and when I say loving the guy on the road, not cutting him off, not doing those things. And man, that's where my relationship, I am tracking today, but it is a constant, it's a daily deal. That's where recovery really helped me in my relationship with Christ. Talking about it, that I love Alcoholics Anonymous because in the big book, it talks about how I'm not cured of alcoholism, but I have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. It's not that I have a spiritual condition, but it's the maintenance of that. Yep. I have a relationship with Christ. No, but it's that maintenance of that. I have that daily reprieve. And you know where we use the word reprieve?
What?
We get a reprieve just south on 45. You and I don't, but there's guys south on 45 in this town called Huntsville.
Okay.
It's the state prison.
Okay. Yeah. Now I'm tracking.
Yeah. And in Huntsville on the state prison, sometimes guys are sentenced to death and they're on death row and they might get a reprieve from the governor. They might get a reprieve. That's a state of execution where they're not going to do it. Hopefully I die a sober alcoholic, but I'm going to die. You're going to die.
Yeah.
We each get a reprieve every day. do I take advantage of that day? So my relationship with Christ is, how can I be of service to others? How can I continue to go to him and see the awesome gift that he's given me? He's given you. I was an alcoholic and active in my addiction, using a lot of drugs, getting in trouble, been arrested several times. But man, God, that was God grabbing hold of me on that November day. I was sober and I was doing what I was told to do. But sometimes God grabs a hold of kids in VBS.
Yep.
That is magical.
Yep.
It's no different. My story might sound better and we could unpack that more. But man, I want to talk about how God's using me today, and he's just prepared me each step of the way.
You've helped hundreds, probably thousands of individuals, not just get sober, but probably save their life in many ways. You've helped families. But around sobriety, is there a common theme of why people use so heavily drugs and drinking? Or is it usually running from something? Is it trauma? Like, you've heard everything you could possibly hear. Like, how would you break down what puts a person in that place to be in such a bad spot?
Yeah. Well, and, on some instances, I do believe that it's a disease, that's an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind.
Yeah.
85, 90% of the population will not have the allergy of the body. And when I say alcoholism, I'm talking drug addiction too. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
But yes, people just, it's like, I don't know, you think of when I was growing up, no one had peanut allergies, but now kids are born with these peanut allergies.
Yeah.
What happens if they touch peanut oil or they eat any peanuts, their throat closes up and you need an EpiPen? The alcoholic, is different, is like when they start drinking, their throat opens up. And so they never get enough. And so I do believe that, but I also, the more we've learned, especially in the last 20 years in the addiction field, I think a lot of people have unresolved trauma or wounds that just perpetuate it, that just set us up for it.
Yep.
And then there's, then our nervous system gets hijacked in a lot of ways. And the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system start to take hold. And so your rational part of your brain shuts off.
Yep.
And I talk, and that can be any addiction. We're talking chemicals, but I talked to a buddy last night that has been sober from sex addiction and pornography. And he started looking at, inappropriate content, and his wife looked at him, and this is a good man who loves the Lord. And he's going, man, it was insanity. I don't know. It just kind of took over him. So a lot of times I think what was taken over him is not being consistent on his recovery, but also probably some unresolved trauma or wounds that he's never dealt with. So I think, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. Well, and then not the breaking point, but the point at which these people start recovering, going back to what we were talking about, is that usually once they have understood something's wrong and I'm a problem, or like, how do you cure these? I'm not saying you're curing them, but how do you save somebody? Or what's the common thread of when somebody's willing to take that turn in their life?
Well, and I'm going to quote again, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Lots of times I introduce myself if I'm in a recovery circles.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, some people don't understand this. I go, hi, I'm Chico. I'm a recovered alcoholic, drug addict. A lot of people say recovering, not recovered, because that sounds like I'm cured. But I'm not cured, but I'm recovered from that, what the big book says, that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So when your addiction has continued on and you're at that place of that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, you kind of give up hope. And so I'm recovered. What takes that person to get to that place of being a recovered, alcoholic or recovering? I'm not going to get into semantics, but I do believe in being recovered of that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body is really doing the work. And doing the work That's what's great. You don't have to be in Alcoholics Anonymous or be an alcoholic or, any kind of addiction to do the work. Is kind of how the big book talks about it, but you can do it in some other ways.
Yeah.
Is getting down and, doing the steps. And the steps are real simple. It's like, admit there's a problem, see that there's something greater than yourself that can restore you to sanity, do a searching and fearless moral inventory. When you do that and share that with someone else and God, then you're going to recognize your character defects and your shortcomings. You're going to ask God to remove those. Then you're going to go into making amends, cleaning up your side of the street. It's not saying you're sorry. It's really taking ownership of your behavior and how it's probably affected these other people. And it's not to get a sorry or, oh, yes, I forgive you. No, it's just like, I want to clean up my side of the street and then continue to do the maintenance. And so that's really the simple thing. And when someone does that and what I believe, that's really surrender. But then continuing to do the work is recognizing, okay, what are the patterns or behaviors where I get back into, my sinful desires of the flesh?
Yeah.
My flesh is weak, but the spirit is strong, and to recognize those things.
You mentioned the higher calling in AA. Is there a difference in recovery for people that follow a higher calling versus people that follow Christ in their recovery?
Well, and you hear a lot of times in AA is, higher power.
Yeah.
Okay. I in Alcoholics Anonymous, now I might be wrong. I think higher power is mentioned 3 times in the big book in the first 164 pages. After those pages is stories, but in the first, that's the meat and potatoes. That's the original text.
Yeah.
In the first 164 pages is higher powers is mentioned 3 times or referenced 3 times.
Yep.
Now, several times it's, God or power greater than yourself.
Okay.
In the third step is made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as we understood him. And so if you look at the context of the big book, it was written in the 30s, by these 2 guys that I think were inspired to write it. But back then, the alcoholic was really shamed and outcast, especially in the church, and it was moral failure. And so there was a lot of spiritual abuse back then.
Yeah.
But if you look at the New Testament, only 3 times is Christianity or Christian mentioned. But we talk about it everywhere.
Yeah.
How did they identify themselves in the first century? They were bondservants, slaves, followers of the way. It wasn't really about being a Christian.
Yeah.
It was about those things. And so we get caught up sometimes on those semantics. So when someone really turns their life over to the care of God, and hopefully for me, as my desire is that they turn it over to Christ, the only true God, that you do see that. I see a lot of guys that I don't know. It's not my place to know if they are, a Christian and they surrendered their life to Christ. But I hope that I can be a witness and not be someone that gets in the way of that.
Maybe let's take now a little bit of time. Like, tell me what you do today. Like, what is maybe a day in the life, or like, what are you focused on? Who are the people you're helping? Who are you on the battlefield with?
So a couple things is I've been a licensed professional counselor for, coming up on 30 years, got my degree from Dallas Seminary. And
really?
So, I went to DTS. And so I've always had a private practice.
Yeah.
Primarily it started out back in the 90s, early 2000s, working with high school and young adults. I don't really do that anymore.
Yeah.
So I have a private practice where I'm working with doing marriage stuff, and I love that. My wife and I do that. And then my wife, Shannon, she's been, truly bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Like Adam said, is like, it wasn't bone of her bones or flesh of her flesh. She's today that has come more alive, that I get to see a little of me in her, and she gets to see a little of her in me. And she has complimented me. She helped me start both programs. She is the founder of Gaston House. She is the founder of Casa Colina. She helped found, I had a counseling practice. So today, I have my counseling practice, but I think you're familiar with this program called Onsite.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I'm doing some stuff with Onsite.
Okay.
And my buddy Miles owns it, and they kind of call me the brand ambassador.
Yeah.
And so I'm just a big time fan of Onsite, because it's really about getting in there and unpacking and doing, those wounds, or if there's trauma, or, what are the different messages that you've been telling yourself. Yeah. So I do a little work with Onsite. I work with some of their clients on a coaching standpoint. So not just counseling, but more coaching. And then the other thing is, I know my buddy, who's your buddy too, Gordon Highlander, is I'm kind of the coach / counselor at Gordon Highlander. And so I'm loving that, and that opportunity to work with their executive team, and sometimes just other employees if they're wrestling with stuff.
Yep. Having
that safe place.
Like, what do you tell people? I'm sure people ask you this. They're like, look, I want to, nobody's bad because they drink.
No.
So it's let's get that like off the table. But you probably talk to a lot of people who are like, man, I wish I could quit. Like, I don't even really, it's just like a social thing. I go after work. It's with my buddies. It's like a glass of wine here. Like, what do you tell people that want to quit, but they just kind of say, like, they just kind of stay in it because it's just like the easiest path forward. They don't lose friends over it. They don't, it's not awkward.
They don't fit the criteria for alcoholism or addiction and stuff like that. But they're going, man, I kind of want to look at this.
Yeah.
But man, it just sounds too hard to look at it.
Yeah.
That's where it's like a lot of times what we're doing is we're projecting, or what I like to call sometimes future tripping. Yeah. It's like, okay, let's just go today. If you want to try to make it today without drinking, let's do that. Why are you thinking about, today's, July 31st, and you're thinking about Texas OU?
Yeah.
Okay, Texas OU hadn't even happened yet.
I'm going to take all the money I would have spent on beer. I'm getting extra corn dogs and getting more cotton candy.
But it's like we get there and we do that. I'm working, work sometimes with people that are going through divorce or stuff like that. And, during the divorce, it's like, hey, you want to be as clear-headed as possible. They're not alcoholic. They don't have any of the characteristics of it, but then they might be getting attacked by the spouse about their drinking.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't give them any power. Don't drink. Okay, I have no problem. Also, you're going to be more clear-headed.
Then what's the definition of having a problem versus not having a problem? Like, could you have somebody that drinks 3 drinks a day that has a problem, and somebody that drinks 3 drinks a day that doesn't have a problem?
Well, I like going back to that definition, an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind.
Yeah.
And so when that allergy kicks in, you go on a craving. You want more and more. And then you have consequences.
Yeah.
Okay. So a spree occurs. You have consequences. And so it's this, what we call the cycle of addiction. And so this cycle goes down. And when the consequences happen, they get to this place down here at the bottom, and they have this firm resolution. Okay, I'm going to stop. And so have they had that firm resolution? And then over here, they're not drinking. And when they're down here at the bottom at this firm resolution, yep, that person that's the alcoholic versus the person that's not the alcoholic, that person gets restless, irritable, discontent. And they go, I know what will relieve that. That's where the mental obsession kicks in. I'll just have one drink.
Yep.
And they do that. But the example I told you about someone that's, going through a divorce and not drinking during this divorce because of accusations and, all the lawyer crap. It's like, okay, they're restless, irritable, discontent. They're going through a divorce, but they're not thinking about, hey, I know what can relieve that.
Yeah.
So that mental obsession isn't there.
Yep.
And so that's the big difference.
Yep.
Right there is all of us are going to get restless, irritable, discontent. The alcoholic solution is, I know what will relieve that. The drug addict solution, I know what will relieve that.
Yep.
When you're facing different life circumstances,
yep.
It's like, that's not the thought. No, I want to become a better parent. I want to become a better whatever.
All right. This might be a tough question. We've talked a little bit about trauma and things that have worked out. You've been doing this for 35 years. You've seen trauma and things don't work out. People pass away. Like, you've probably
been to a lot of funerals. Spoken at several funerals.
I guess it's just more of a personal question. Like, how do you carry that around? That's a unique spot in the world to be in, to see so much success from destruction, but also see destruction lead to chaos.
I was told years ago, this was, over 30 years ago, I was the drug and alcohol counselor at SMU.
You were?
Yeah.
So you went from being the drug and alcohol user to the drug and alcohol counselor in like 5 or 6 years?
Yeah.
I love
literally in 1989, in the spring of 89. And I went back and looked at my, the police report from the SMU police because I got to, 5, 6 years later. I mean, I had the longest report as of that date, even 5 years later. I mean, there was a lady police officer, SMU police officer, who they're actually police officers, but I was running through the dorms drunk and stuff like that. And gets called, me. I went and she had her door open and goes, come over here. I sat on her lap, grabbed the mic out of her hand and said, come get me, rent-a-cops, and SMU wanted to kick me out. And then 6 years later, they're hiring me to be the drug and alcohol counselor. And so,
like 5'7.5" male, seen crying and fighting through the campus is now here. But yeah, you've seen a lot of where things go wrong.
And so my mentor then, which I passed it on, I give him credit. Okay. His name's Sam Brito. He's in his 90s now. And he was my boss, my mentor at that time in my life. And I would take it personal if these guys relapsed or something happened. And he goes, Chico, if you take credit for the successes, you need to take credit for the failures. And so, yes, there's been a lot of success. I've gotten to be a part of that, but I don't want to take any credit for that. God used me, and I got to give him the glory. And he's given me a gift with my sensitivity and my straight shooting. It's like a weird combination, and so it's like, I get this gift. I want to step into that gift, but I also want to step into the fact that, man, it's not up to me. I'm not in the results business.
Yeah.
And so that's what's helped me not take those things on. That doesn't mean I don't weep. I had a man who I met with his daughters and his wife, a month ago, got him to treatment a year and a half ago, actually lives in my neighborhood. His oldest daughter went to high school with my youngest son. And so that's how, I even know him even more than just in my office. He shot himself in his backyard, and so I went over to, their house when I found out, and just got the daughters connected with a therapist, made sure the wife's connected, but my heart aches, and I went home and wept, but I, at the same time, it's like, I can't take credit for that failure, and I can't take credit for the successes that these other men are doing. Last night, a guy 40 years old, he's in the field of addiction, came through my program, doing real well, works for this program up in Colorado, took me to dinner to my favorite restaurant, Javier's. But he was I can't take credit for his success. And he gave me such a good gift. I called my wife. She's out of town. He said, Josh said, and he goes, Chico, you and Shannon's marriage is the marriage I want. And it's like, man, not the recovery. He wants our marriage. Recovery makes my marriage possible, but that is, I don't want to take credit for that. I looked at Josh, I go, and Josh is a believer, but he's just kind of isn't getting poured into by other men that are believers. And I challenged him with that. I go, Josh, the only reason is God's grace and mercy. That Shannon has a faith that is so much greater than mine. And then I am trusting him.
Did you all start your marriage with that faith, or did you build that up throughout marriage?
Well, we were in our 20s. We both loved the Lord in our 20s, but man, it's like, I think, the things I said and did in my 20s from a faith standpoint was, I'll never treat my kids that way, or I'll do this. It's just like, we make funny statements.
Yeah. I think I know the answer to this question, but why are more people vulnerable probably with you or with an on-site counselor they've never met before than they would ever be with somebody that they live with? Why do people tend to spill the beans, not to strangers, but is it because of
why are they more vulnerable with the people that are not close to them?
Well, and maybe that's characterizing a little too much. I think once somebody has been vulnerable and has experienced that, they're probably more likely to be vulnerable over and over again. But for a lot of people, that first time they've kind of really told the truth to somebody, or this is what I'm really dealing with, you tend to see that happen behind closed doors, often with a professional. What is it about society that makes it to where you have to get to that point to kind of spill the beans, and you can't do it before then with a family member or friend? I'm not saying everybody doesn't do that, but especially men, like they very rarely will tell you what's really going on, but then they'll go see someone and they're like, yeah, I told them everything.
Yeah.
Why don't they just do that in their everyday life?
Fear.
Fear of what?
Fear of man, fear of what this person's going to think, fear of judgment, fear of abandonment, fear of looking less than.
So the fear is the blocker to truly kind of setting themselves free.
Yeah. And I had a buddy that I went to DTS with that did a word study. He saw in scriptures that fear, not even anxiety or terrified or stuff like that, is there's 365 different references to fear alone in scripture. And so God's telling us something that, man, we struggle with fear. The fear of man, the fear of abandonment, the fear of loneliness, the fear, pushes that away. We had this little dog we had to put down. We had it for about 12 years. It was a rescue dog, but man, he only liked us. You come to my house, anybody comes to the house, he 18-pound just terror. Okay. But he wasn't angry. He was always scared. He was abused before, for 2 years before we got him. But he was this little dog that was just, and sometimes I'd pick him up and he wouldn't snap at me, but he'd be shaking. And so what we see is guys will put off that front from men, women, and I don't think it's unique with men. Women just talk more. They use more words.
Yeah.
So they're talking a lot and they're talking in circles and it's all over the map. It's kind of funny. Yes. I have two brains, the male brain and the female brain.
Yeah.
And if I had a dry race board, the male brain has quadrants. You have your work quadrant, you have your sports quadrant, you have your sex quadrant.
Yeah.
And it's like you just move into that. When you're here with people you're working with, you're not thinking about sex, maybe a little bit about going home, but you're just there. With the woman brain, and when I draw a picture, it's like nonstop. It's all over the place. There's no quadrants. It's always moving around. So we think that they really know their feelings and are in touch with their feelings. No, they're just using a lot more words. So it's not unique.
So what's the general fear of men and what's the general fear of women?
And this is just a theory and Chico theory, so don't take it to heart.
Well, it's your podcast.
I think if you get down deep, for a man, the fear of being found out as a phony or a fraud.
Yeah.
And then that will manifest itself in all sorts of different ways. I've had 2 successful businesses that I sold, but when I sold them, it's like I got a lot of my identity from being the guy.
Yeah.
And so when those things went down a different turn than I was anticipating, it's like I really had to see that, man, I was getting a lot of my identity in being that. And I thought I was fearful of being a phony or a fraud. And I was forgetting all the people that I got to come in contact with, that I got to work with, that I got to, be part of their recovery, or be part of their life. I mean, my last program that I didn't anticipate to sell or anything like that is Father's Day happened, and it's been 3.5 years, and several of the employees sent me Happy Father's Day. I mean, it's like I hadn't been in their lives in 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Those kind of things, but we get fearful of that. I think in this, and so if women are listening, you can bash me. But I think women's, I'm not good enough. That there's that I'm not good enough mentality.
Yeah.
I'm not a good enough mom. I'm not a good enough spouse. I'm not a good enough friend. There's those fears. And I think that becomes the driver.
Okay. 2 questions, and then we're going to get to Gordo here in a second. Is addiction genetic or by choice?
Nature or nurture?
Yeah.
I think it's both.
Okay.
You
hear all the time like it runs in the family.
Yeah, and there's you can see that, but that definitely that nurturing component and growing up in that those families. But nature is like, man, especially addiction now with all these different drugs and stuff like that, it is huge. The crazy thing is, there's so many people, and I know, Chris, you probably know a ton. I know guys in their 70s that haven't smoked pot in 40 years now that are eating gummies when they go to Colorado, and the marijuana is so much stronger, and it has that addictive component than it did, 20 years, 30, 40 years ago, is so much stronger. And so there's this big misconception. It's just marijuana. And so you're seeing that, and just like the example of, hey, I have 3, glasses of wine a day, or 3 beers a day, or 3 scotches a day. But people are eating gummies or hitting the vape pen multiple times a day that are out here in the business world and, successful, quote unquote. And, I'm putting quotes up, but it becomes a dependency there.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing that more and more, especially, and then you look at the opiates and this, the opiate epidemic and all that as well.
Is it getting worse or better?
Worse or
like all these drugs? Is like every year it just continues to get worse and worse? Or are you seeing a trend that like maybe this younger generation doesn't care as much about taking drugs and pills and everything?
I think there's a movement going on with the younger generation.
Yeah.
That are getting in there and wanting to grow spiritually.
Yeah.
And getting away from things. It's kind of almost like a revival happening. And I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
We always, I think some of it is in our media, everything's tilted towards the negative when there's a lot of positive things going on. What happened in Asbury, Kentucky last year, what happened at Auburn and on these, college campuses, and seeing people really grow there at the different churches around the country, not just here in the Bible Belt Buckle, but all over the country is like young people are, the media is saying people are straying away from it, but I think the church is changing.
Yep.
And I'm excited about the change. I think we're going to get away from the big churches and the mega churches, but I think it's more of these smaller, kind of more home churches and people going, no, man, there's more to life. So I think there's a positive thing happening at the same time.
Totally agree. All right. Our friend Greg Gordon.
Yes. AKA
and we don't have it at Fort, but it's been an inspiration. Maybe one day we'll have something similar. So describe your relationship with the business. And I just want to talk about what you do with them. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners that listen to this. So like, what do you do with them? And then maybe we can talk about stories or things that have happened since you started working with the company.
Well, Gordo and I's relationship goes back, 17 years.
Yep.
And I love that. And that's his story to tell. But, as our relationship really turned into a deep friendship, in that sense of the opposite of addiction is relationship. And we have that where we're pouring into each other and, finding out what's going on. He saw the need as his company has just blown up over the last 17 years. And I was there at the beginning, but I wasn't involved in the company. But really what happened is I had this program called Gaston House, structured sober living in Dallas. And, Gordo and I's friendship really expanded. And I asked him to take on a couple guys that I saw potential in. And so he saw these guys that were doing the work when it came to recovery, but then they were doing the work for him, and one of them in particular, that came through my program from a little small town in Virginia, now married with 3 kids. His parents even moved down here, in his mid to late 30s, but he hired him about, I think almost 14 years ago, maybe 13 years ago. But he saw that, hey, this guy, there's something different about him. And so as that went on, Gordo and I's, he would bring up situations with employees and stuff like that. He goes, I like his mission, to build a legacy for people to reach their God-given potential. With his mission statement as a construction company, what is a person's God-given potential? And Greg doing his own work on himself and seeing the wounds and the different trauma and the messages that have driven him. They've driven him for success in a lot of ways, but he wanted that to be part of the fabric of Gordon Highlander. And so that over the last few years has morphed into, if someone is struggling, in a marriage or an addiction or other things like that, is like I've met with them individually. And in the last couple years, now it's really morphed into, hey, how can Chico coach our, executive team? How can Chico then come in alongside and coach maybe a different supervisor for people underneath them, to unpack? Because what I love about it, and that's one of the coolest things. What I love about it is it's like he's going, man, what is getting in the way from some of these people that are working at Gordon Highlander to reach their God-given potential? And it might be wounds or messages from their childhood, from family, from old relationships, and what's blocking that. So let's create a safe space to do that. I mean, so a couple of his, higher up guys, I'm coaching, and sometimes it might be just a relationship with their wife, and how that might be playing out in relationship with other people that are underneath him, in this block. Gordo and I were in Nashville, and I introduced him to some friends of mine. It's called Walker Lumber and Supply. It's these guys that went to SMU with me, and their company has blown up, and they're trying to do some of that same stuff at Walker Lumber and Supply in Nashville. And it's wild to see. They have a whole second chance program. And so it's like, I see companies now going, hey, there's more to EBITDA. There's more to the bottom line. How do we create an environment to really have that safe place, to have healthy vulnerability, not unhealthy vulnerability. And so I talk a lot about what's healthy vulnerability versus unhealthy vulnerability. What needs to be shared and stuff like that, and how to create that space. So that's what I'm doing.
So are you kind of like a company chaplain? Like, are you on call? Do people call you on a one-off, hey, I need to talk to you about something? Do you have like a regular cadence that you show up and everybody knows you're going to be there? Like, what is your actual, if you had to describe like your routine, maybe daily, weekly, monthly, annually?
So I have some of the employees I do via Zoom because I might not be here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but some of them I do that. Some of them come to my office, and then there's times that I go and I spend time with the executive team that, Greg and Brad and Steve and Mandy.
Yeah.
And so I'll be in there in that part to give just, Mandy's the human relations person. And so it's like, how to bring that human capital, what's going on psychologically, how do we step into some uncomfortable conversations with someone that's struggling?
Yeah.
And so I'll do that. Last week or week before, I was heading up north for me. And I swung by there and just walked around, for about 45 minutes and stopped in and talked to some people. So the company knows, oh, that's Chico. They will reach out. I think when Gordo was on your podcast and he had that team member that took his life,
mm-hmm.
I was up there on call and I showed up. Brad reached out. And so it wasn't Gordo that reached out to me. Gordo was, out of the state. Brad called, hey, can you come up and spend some time with some staff members? And one of the staff members was the one that was at the house and called the police. Yeah. And so there was just a lot of those things. And so it's unique when you see a company so invested in their employees. A lot of people have HR departments, and big companies, you're going to have HR and you're going to have, different resources. But no, we're going to create this space. And I'll get some people at Gordon Highlander, hey, here's a good therapist, or what do you need to do here? And so I'm kind of coach, chaplain, therapist all in one.
Do you want to do it for more companies, or is it kind of
I would love to do it for more companies, especially companies that the leadership is bought into it.
Yeah.
Are you doing your own work? That's what my group, and it started at Onsite, my Onsite Notorious Sinners group, is like, hey, are you willing to do the work?
Yeah.
So it's kind of modeled after, the Notorious Sinners of how do we do that? And what is cool is Miles and I are talking more and more about this too, is it's really more about, are you familiar with regenerative farming?
No.
Regenerative farming is, there's some farms here in Texas. There's a really cool one in Georgia. Guy, wrote a book and has a big podcast and YouTube. It's getting the soil back to the way it was meant to be by God, where they're not pumping it full of fertilizer or nitrogen and, getting as much out of it as possible.
Yeah.
Let's look at the soil and, let the chickens, crap on it. Let's let some weeds come up, get it back to the way it's meant to be. And so there's this big concept on regenerative leadership, and regenerative counseling is like, not all weeds or traumas or wounds are bad. They make us who we are.
Yeah.
And so when there's almost like going back to trauma, it's like, oh, trauma's bad. No, it defined me. Yes, I lost my dad. You've lost your father, but it's defined me. It's made me a better person. Sometimes it can paralyze us and we can get paralyzed there, but getting back to kind of regenerative leadership or regenerative farming, like the concept of regenerative farming, the way God intended it to be, I think we can do that same concept in business. what did God intend? There's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with profits. But what is our mission? Are we really giving lip service to, hey, we're really about our employees? Do they have the freedom to go, hey, I'm struggling? I might need a mental health day. And then having the discernment to go, are they working me or do they really need a mental health day?
Yeah. Do you think on that token, do you think that it seems like no matter what you watch or what you read or what you listen to, everything's like mental health, mental health, mental health, mental health. You think it's overplayed a little bit? Because to like what you just said about trauma and everything is like mistakes and failure, and that's all good for you. Like that's God's way of preparing you in different ways for the future and being able to be resilient. And obviously there's terrible traumas and things you wish never happened. But I think we've also swung to this point where it's like, if you blame everything on mental health, you can train a whole generation almost to not really take accountability or to be able to process or function anything that isn't like the way it would be written in perfectly written in a book. Everything else is like a mental health issue.
We're going to have struggles. And yes, sometimes it's good to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
I don't know about an 8-year-old. Don't,
for sure.
Like the example.
Yeah, there's nuance to it.
Yes. And so, yes, the mental health field has been overplayed, and I'm in the field, and there's bad therapy out there, and not all therapy is good therapy. And if your therapist isn't working on you to graduate out of therapy, you might want to get a new therapist.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, man, those things happen all the time. Hey, I think it's time for you to move on or take a break for a few years, come back up as, when life circumstances change. I'm seeing a few guys that came through Gaston House, 12, 15 years ago. They weren't married. They didn't have a career. Now they're in this new place. They're not using, they're sober, but they have, kids and mortgage and all this other stuff. And they're not knowing how to process that. And they're stuff like that. Okay. They come back in and we're unpacking some stuff. And what are the old things, happening? But yes, not everybody needs therapy, but we do need relationship.
For sure. How would you know if you were, you said not all therapy is good therapy. How would you know it was like not a good situation? What would be a tell that it's not a great either therapist for you, maybe a bad match, or just in general, like not a therapist that's, succeeding?
If you don't have goals set up with your therapist, if they're in, okay, hey, what are you trying to, get out of this?
Yeah.
If your therapist, it is not encouraging you to dig deeper.
Yeah.
And maybe it's co-signing your behavior, and, there might be great, I don't know. There's some bad therapy out there, but there's also some, just like there's bad real estate guys, there's bad construction guys, it's not any different. Bad doctors, it's not any different than any industry. Do your homework, reach out.
Is the fact that private equity is getting into recovery and counseling and all these services probably mean it's going to get better or worse? Or
well, in the treatment industry, I believe private equity has stolen the heart of the mission of a lot of programs.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people, they're too consumed with the bottom dollar and how to cut cost. And how do you cut cost when maybe some of your best employees are your techs, or, a tech's kind of like an RA in a dorm.
Yeah.
And it's not as much about the therapist and how you need to pay some of those techs more because they've created that safe space.
Yeah.
That they get away with, how do we cut cost and the heart and mission. Now, the people that, sell to private equity, that's great. I basically was forced out of my programs to basically private equity. I mean, it was big, billionaire guys, but both those programs are shut down.
Yeah.
They ran them, they got to, hey, bottom line instead of the heart. And it's a bummer, but God had a different plan for me, and hopefully for them too.
All right, we'll bring it on this one. If somebody's listening to this, maybe in a tough spot, like what would you tell them?
A lot of times somebody's listening to this, I bet you it's people that have taken risk in business, that have taken risk in other things, to be successful in those areas.
Yep.
But if they could take a risk to find someone to share in that safe place, they can spur them on to find out that place that they might need for help. They maybe don't need for help. Not every alcoholic or drug addict needs treatment. A lot don't need treatment. That's where sometimes bad therapy happens. Oh, they need treatment. No, I've worked with a lot of people that didn't actually need treatment.
Right.
But to find that person or that someone that you go, okay, hey, I need to share this because, what it might be messages. It might not even be anything addiction wise. It might be the false messages in your head.
Yeah.
But you feel all alone, is to take that risk. You take other risk. How come you don't take this risk?
Chico, you're the man.
Chris, you're the man.
Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, I loved it. Thank you for reaching out.
This was awesome.
It was a lot of fun.
The large companies have been doing this forever.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's finally making its way into small business, which is hiring a global workforce. But I think a lot of small businesses wake up and they think, that's only something the large companies could do. It's got to be really complicated. I don't even know where to start. I think that's one of the coolest things about Relay Human Cloud is how simple it is. Jason, how simple is it to actually work with Relay Human?
We had the same questions when we started. How would you even do this? And most people stop right there. It's too complicated. How would we do it? We don't know. So what Relay Human Cloud has done is they've made that super simple. You have the ability to log into a system that seems very familiar. It's not like logging into some website in India that you're worried about, right? They've made it very simple where you can log in, you can see all the candidates, see what fits what you're working for. You have somebody that you're going to talk to that's going to help guide you. We had a gentleman that we were able to say, this is what we need, this is what we're looking for. And then once we got set up, onboarding people, the talent is already identified. Once we've identified what we need, onboarding them becomes a matter of days. Very, very simple because these are talented people already in an office ready to go. And so them being added to your team can happen almost instantly. And from our experience, we've been able to, when we identify a new need or that we need to add on to our team, we find that the person once onboarded onto our team, within days, they are up and running and taking over responsibilities or adding to the existing team that exists. And that is because of the process that has been put in place, not only at Relay Human Cloud, but the process that once you're in the system doing it, it's very repetitive. And so we can bring people on just like it's actually easier than bringing someone on locally.
Yep.
Because they do a lot of the heavy lifting. We don't have to do it. It's all done there. And so all we get to do is just start working. And so we have found it to be a tremendous value. And we're always looking for how can we continue to extend our workforce there because of the efficiencies it brings and the fact that we're not responsible for a lot of the heavy lifting on the operational management, onboarding, training, all that stuff happens at Relay Human Cloud.